Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Flores Lopez, and I use she, her pronouns. I serve in two roles at the College of Natural Science, the Interim Assistant Dean of DEI and the Director of Academic Advising and Student Success Initiatives. We are going to go ahead and get started tonight with our land acknowledgement. We collectively acknowledge that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, for Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Tasha Warfield. I use the pronoun she, her. I am an academic advisor in Lyman Briggs College. I would like to welcome you to Amplify STEM, hosted by the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources, Lyman Briggs College, the College of Natural Science, and the College of Veterinary Medicine. Amplify STEM seeks to honor and recognize different voices from within MSU and the broader community. One of the greatest strengths of the U.S. talent pool and workforce is diversity. However, according to the National Science Foundation, women, people with disabilities, and individuals who are Black, Hispanic, Latino, AEX, and Indigenous are underrepresented in STEM. A variety of factors, including higher levels of discrimination, unnecessary barriers, implicit bias, microaggressions, lack of role models and mentors, and less academic preparation too often limits who pursues, persists, and succeeds in STEM. Next, I would like to introduce Io, who will introduce our alumni panelists.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Tasha. Greatly appreciate it. We are so pleased to be joined today by a panel of MSU alumni from STEM colleges to discuss their academic and professional experiences in STEM and to answer questions about their career paths. Each of our alumni panelists will introduce themselves and share about their career path, highlights from their time at MSU, and advice for students in STEM and for faculty and staff to support underrepresented students. Our first panelist is Sungai Chibanga, who graduated from MSU in 2014 with a degree in computational math and actuarial science. Please give her a round of applause through the chat.
Awesome. So my name, as mentioned, Sungai Chibanga. What it means, it means to persevere. I think I've embodied that throughout all my career and life. So guess I got a good name from the start. And then my background, I was originally from Zimbabwe. It's where I've spent most of my formative years. Then I came to MSU, got my bachelor's degrees. And then from there, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I went to University of Minnesota in Duluth to get my master's in computational math. And then from there, after I got my master's, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Nothing was quite fitting in my, at least, world that I created for myself. So it was also cold in Minnesota, so I decided to move on to Florida, where I started my PhD in big data analytics, essentially. While I was studying for my PhD, I managed to network with some friends that were in the same program that worked for a gaming company, Electronic Arts. They have a studio in Orlando. They approached me. They're like, hey, there's a job opening. You should apply. I applied, and then I simultaneously found my dream job right there. And then there was a lot going on. We all experienced COVID. So during COVID, I was in my PhD program. I was working a full-time job. I ended up having a baby. So I had 3 things going on. One had to give. So I dropped out of my PhD. Now I'm pursuing a full-time career in data analytics at Electronic Arts. It's a dream job. I've always enjoyed playing video games. I've played EA games, FIFA. I've played Madden. So I truly enjoy what I do, and it helps me apply everything I learned from Michigan State, essentially. So I don't know if there are other questions I need to be answering.
Oh, no, that's great. We're going to hold on
All right, all right.
for the Q&A portion, but I'm really looking forward to our Q&A. Our next panelist is Allison Krajewski, who graduated in 2009 with a degree in human biology. Allison?
Hello, everyone. My middle name is actually Kumbil, which is Korean for gold star. And I was adopted at 4 months old with my twin sister from Korea. So we kept our given names that we had then as our middle names. So first and last name are pretty, well, maybe not my last name isn't traditional, but my middle name has roots to my Korean background. I did, like as mentioned, I graduated in 2009 with a degree in human bio from Lyman Briggs. From there, I went to graduate school. I went to Boston University School of Public Health and got my graduated there in 2011. I then came back to Michigan, and I worked for the state health department there for about 1.5 years. And then during that time, I was like, oh, I want to do more, and I wanted to do research. I was really interested in environmental epidemiology. So I went back to school for my PhD at University of Illinois, Chicago, graduated in 2016 from there, and then moved on to a postdoc down in North Carolina at US EPA. Right now, I am an epidemiologist at EPA, and I worked on the integrated scientific assessments for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So we review a bunch of literature, and we help to set regulatory standards for 6 criteria air pollutants. And it's always busy and always interesting, always fun. I mainly focus in reproductive and developmental outcomes as well as cancer. I think that covered some of it, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Allison.
Yeah.
For our next panelist is John Purakal, who graduated in 2007 with a degree in human biology. John?
Good evening, everybody. I'm John, as mentioned, and thanks for having me. I feel like I've gotten to know the 2 that have spoken before me here pretty well. It's our 3rd time doing one of these together. My name is last name is Purakal, which doesn't necessarily translate directly to anything. It's part of a longer last name that is kind of known as like a family name where I'm from in India, in Kerala. So the entire name was translated to house of the miller, or like a miller's home. And so my part of the name would translate to house or home if there was a direct translation, but it's not exactly direct. I'm from Kerala, as I mentioned. My parents immigrated to America in the 70s from Kerala, and with like a stop in Belgium where my dad got his PhD, and then I was born in Detroit. Went to Michigan State and graduated in 2007, human bio. And from there, went on to Wayne State for medical school, UIC for my residency in emergency medicine, and then my first faculty job was at University of Chicago. And then almost 4.5 years ago now, moved down to North Carolina, and I'm at Duke University now. And I think there were a couple other questions, but we're going to hold off until Q&A for that. So, okay.
That's great, John.
Well,
no,
great to be here.
You're right on the ball. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Glad to have you. So up next, I'll have our moderator introduce herself and the next portion of our program.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Christula Vasiliou. I use she, her as pronouns. I'm an academic specialist in the Department of Chemistry in the College of Natural Science. Thank you so much to all our panelists. And would like to get started with our Q&A. I put in the chat, please, if you have any questions, put your questions in Q&A and we'll be monitoring. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, please write their name as well so we know who to ask. And I'll give you a little bit of time to come up with your questions and perhaps get started with a very general question for all three of you. How did you decide to pursue an education and a career in STEM? And, you know, whoever wants to jump in, you can go ahead.
I'll go first, I guess. My parents both worked in a hospital. My dad works in a cath lab, and my mom is an x-ray tech. So always kind of grown up around like medical stuff, and it was like always talked about at home. And I just really liked aspects of being in science, being in medicine, helping people. I got interested in epidemiology when I was at Michigan State. I was pre-med, and then I was like, oh, what's this other thing? Never heard of it before. And that was kind of how I got into epidemiology, but I've always been interested in science. Epidemiology is kind of like a interdisciplinary field that uses like health outcomes. It uses like exposure science, it uses atmospheric science. There's some statistics in there. So it's a combination of a lot of different STEM fields, and there's always interesting things to think about, problems to work through, and that's kind of how I got started in my path. So
thank you, Alison. Anybody else?
I can go next. So as I mentioned before, I grew up in Zimbabwe for the most part, all the way through high school. I was there. So there's definitely a little pressure from my parents and society in general to go study from, I think good number of like people who grew out outside the country might be aware of this, but so there's a little pressure from society, and then from also my parents being like, what are you going to do? You're going to graduate high school, and then society expects you to get a law degree, business degree, or a hard science degree. I always liked math. My dad was a great mathematician. He went on to study, I think he came over and studied economics, agricultural economics, and then came back to Zimbabwe and started applying that. So that's what he spent most of his career doing. So I've always had a passion for math. So when I came to Michigan State, I wasn't quite sure where math would take me. Because you get a degree in math, so everybody would ask me, are you going to be a high school teacher? I'm like, not necessarily. That's not all you can do with math, right? But nobody could give me a solid answer on that. So when I first initially came to Michigan State, I was pre-med. I thought, hey, this is a hard science. I would make my parents proud. Everybody would be so proud of me. Let me do this. But that's not where my passion was. I ended up switching my sophomore year to some computational math and actuarial science. That is more along my wheelhouse. And then I guess you can do a lot more with math. I'm a data analyst. I'm not a high school teacher or whatever else other stereotypes people add to getting math degrees. So that's how I ended up studying what I study.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, so my mother is a pediatrician, retired now, but she served in Detroit, primarily uninsured and underinsured patients for her career. And so I oftentimes, similar to as has been mentioned already, kind of dinner conversations and everything have centered around a lot of those conflicts that people have, or social factors that prevented adequate care or treatment plans to be able to be made and things like that. And so I knew I wanted to go into medicine, but I certainly at a pretty young age, I think I just wanted to be like my mom. And but then as I got older, I was really into education and teaching, and that's something that my parents both are very stressed, very heavily. And I wanted to find a field within medicine that there was an intersection between kind of addressing unmet social needs and kind of being right at the forefront of that, and education as well. And I think that you have to have a very particular type of personality to be able to educate in an emergency room type setting. But I think that oftentimes there's a lot of people who that's the only care that they get, potentially. And so it's a really important and vital role too, from an education standpoint. So once I kind of realized that it was an intersection between a lot of the things that I'm passionate about, emergency medicine became much more clear as like a field within medicine for me.
Thank you. We actually do have a question in the chat. what were some things, activities, internships, whatever that you did as an undergraduate to prepare for your post-undergraduate education, whether that was graduate school or professional school, and or your career? So, any advice for the students attending?
I can take, I mean, some of this I'm sure you've heard before, in terms of shadowing and just kind of getting exposure to fields that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be just for medicine. This applies to anything, right? So kind of getting around people in the fields that you're interested in and spending some time with them, and finding people who are willing and willing mentors. To be able to kind of follow them and just bounce ideas off about what your career interests are and see, and someone who's going to be honest with you too. I think that's really important in terms of mentorship. I did a lot of that. I did some research, and then in undergrad I was part of BIMA, which I'm not sure if it's still around. Briggs Multiracial or Multicultural Alliance. It was a student organization then, but I was pretty involved with that. Did a lot of volunteer work through that. And yeah, I mean, just involved with like the CIUS and the Indian organization on campus and things like that. But really, for specific to medicine, I mean, it was shadowing. I did some research. I found someone who was willing to teach, and really finding good mentors. I think that's a big part of it for me, was like people who I could bounce ideas off of and just like kind of see what their perspective is on their careers.
Thank you. Somebody else would like to answer?
Yeah, I would say the same. Like any shadowing for any job, regardless if it's medicine, I did a lot of that as a pre-med student. But it also kind of got you interested into other aspects of that as well, talking to tons of different people when you shadow, not just the doctors that are there as well. I also worked in a research lab, just exploring like what it was to be like working on bench science, doing some genetic research. So I kind of knew I wanted to do something medicine related, something, along that line, but I didn't want to also close myself off to other opportunities. So I will say, keep your options open. If you're interested in something, you're not really sure, go for it, try it out. I feel like there was, I was pre-med and then didn't I go to med school. I went to graduate school for public health. And I feel like having some of that experience of trying new things, trying to figure out exactly what I wanted, like working in a research lab, was helpful. I was also involved in some student organizations that were outside of Briggs, organizations within Briggs as well, some pre-med stuff, but then trying to expand into other activities that like I had interest in, but wasn't sure what it was about, just to, for one, meet people and hear their perspectives on things, and to just try to understand like what I was interested in and trying to figure that out at the time too. And just being open to opportunities as they come across, and not closing off and saying, no, I want to go this path and I'm not going to think about anything else. So that was probably the best things that helped, was just trying to think about everything, all your options, and, talking with people and just getting their experiences as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said. One thing I did try to do undergrad, beyond like the career specific items, I was also part of the African Students Union. Hopefully it's still a thing at Michigan State, but I also tried different things. I joined the breakdancing club. I tried rowing. I think I tried a lot of clubs just to, figure out who you are, figure out what you want to do, right? Because if you just pigeonhole yourself into one thing, you might realize like when it's too late. Well, it's never too late in life for anything, but you might realize, hey, this might not have been what I wanted to do all along. So try everything out there. Try everything, anything that interests you. For all you know, you might find an intersection from this niche passion that you have and what you want your career field. So I work with video games. Played a lot of video games. I studied a lot of math. Here I am working as a data analyst at a video game company. So you might find that your interests you might find a career in some of your interests, essentially. So take care of yourself, essentially.
So, in your position, were there any challenges or things that you struggled with, workload or burnout? I'm sure we all face this.
I can start on this one. Yeah, so I have a faculty position. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Medicine at Duke. And if you were interested in academics, regardless of if you choose to go into medicine or not, you have to be passionate about the work that you're doing, and that you're not going into it for I mean, maybe historically there was prestige there. I don't know that that's still the case, but that's a discussion for another topic. I would say that you're not going into it for money necessarily, right? And I think I look at a lot of my colleagues and who go into business or even if they work in the community in medicine, right? And they bill for literally anything that they do. They can charge their employer or a customer or whatever the case may be for anything that they do that is like using their specialty or their specialization. And in academics, that's just not the case. Like you have a position, you have a title, and that title comes with a lot of work that doesn't ever necessarily show up anywhere, doesn't necessarily equate to something where you're going to get a bonus for doing this extra work, and you're always asked to do extra work. So all of your professors, in case no one's ever told you this, like they're writing letters of recommendation constantly. They're teaching courses. They're doing mentorship meetings, that are half an hour to an hour, on any given day of the week, on top of their requirements to teach, and then on top of that to do research, right? And so certainly time management and being kind of understanding of, like, as was already mentioned, giving your focus on yourself a little bit too. You have to understand that there's limits, and so certainly workload. As a junior faculty member, when I first started, I remember just kind of saying yes to everything. That's always what you heard, was like, take every opportunity and say yes to everything, right? And I don't know if that mantra is necessarily the best for your wellness. I think that you have to kind of start with things that you're, staying true to yourself. If you want to say yes to everything, making sure that they are at least in line with your career goals and your passions, not just saying yes to everything because you want to be known as the person that's is always willing to help out. Because ultimately, especially if you go into academics, like there's like I am, I mean, there's just no end to the asks that will come, because there's always there's always another way you can help students. There's always another thing that can be done, and we love doing it, and that's why we do it. That's why you go into this field. But certainly that, and then COVID obviously created a little bit of burnout in my field, for most people, and I was fortunate to kind of get through that, and I saw a lot of my colleagues, not as much the physicians, but certainly a lot of people left academic medicine during COVID, because of just the intense amount of stress that was going on during that time for anybody practicing. And then on top of that, the fact that there were demands to, meet these other things that I've already mentioned, these other requirements as an academician, on top of dealing with the mental and physical stresses that COVID put on all of us. So yeah, those are things, some of that is a daily struggle in terms of the daily workload struggle of being in academics. And then, COVID obviously is a very unique situation for a few years.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yeah, of
I
course.
can add a little bit, or at least a different perspective from a different field. My biggest challenge in my current career is, I'm aware I'm smart enough. I got hired by the company to do the work that I do, but my biggest challenge was feeling like I belong, essentially. Because if you look at the video game industry or the tech industry, for example, there are a lot of people who don't look like me. So I end up being like the only me in a room full of people who don't look like me. So at least that, for me, that was the biggest thing that I had to navigate. So I had to learn how to advocate for myself, advocate for my needs, and like essentially grow in this space and make sure I'm not getting lost in everything else, and then also not feeling like I don't belong, because we are all hired, we all have skills, otherwise we would not be here, right? So I do belong, but just navigating those feelings of not belonging. So at least for me, was the biggest challenge when I first got hired, just imposter syndrome all around. Be like, I'm not your stereotypical gamer. I'm not your stereotypical person in this industry. So where do I fit in all of this? And then it's still a challenge right now, also just navigating that, being like, okay, I'm in a room where nobody else looks like me. Now what, right? Is that going to hinder my progress, or am I going to overcome and like, be as great as I can be? So at least that is a current challenge that I still face. So
I was going to say, I agree with both of what's been said too. It's been getting over some of the imposter syndrome when you first start a new position. That is definitely hard. Also, I work in the federal government, and a lot of upper level management is not diverse at all. And I sit in a room a lot of times with people, and I'm the only one that's not, different. Being a young and female as well is also adding to that as well. So it's really hard to stick up for myself and be like, no, I'm the expert. I do know what I'm talking about. You hired me to do this. So, and that's massively challenging at times, and it can be intimidating. And currently we've had a lot of turnover in our group. There's been a lot of retirements, so we are down to like 3 staff when we used to have 15. So it's a massive workload that we're trying to accomplish at this time, and it's hard to be like, no, I can work extra hours and get this done, and like not want to try to take it all on yourself, because there's a lot of us that are like newer employees, like more junior to some of the people. And so you're like, I want to prove myself, I want to get a promotion, but it's hard to say no. As I think John mentioned as well too, it's like you always say yes when you start a new position. You always say yes to new things. Being kind of new and trying to prove, get over your imposter syndrome as well, it's really hard to say no. And especially with the current workload that we have, and we're starting to get some new hires in, but it's government and it's a little bit slow at times. So it's been hard to struggle to balance that. But there's certain things that we work on that are court ordered, mandated on the Federal Circuit Court. So we must meet deadlines. So you have to give up some things sometimes to do that. And whether that's research projects that you were really excited about, or collaborations, or a paper that you just wanted to get done and you can't do it now, you do have to try to figure out that priority of that workload as well, and try to balance what you can do, what is feasible to do, and not try to work yourself to death over it.
So since we brought up the imposter syndrome, any of you have any tips, any suggestions for some of our student attendees who might be facing similar things, even as an undergrad, perhaps, depending on the class they're attending?
I would say good mentors, good collaborators, good support systems. I work with a really good group of research collaborators, and they are so supportive of saying, no, you know this, no, you're good at this, no, you can do this. And having somebody constantly root for you is like, I think, something that really just helps you kind of, okay, I can do it. It's that little confidence boost sometimes when you're not feeling like, do I know this well enough? Was this right? And it's intimidating to be like, oh yeah, I'm trying to publish this paper. Did I do the analysis right? And then you have people saying, no, it's good, So I think having people in your corner, having a good support system has been massively helpful, for at least for me. So
I agree with what Allison said. A great support system can go a long way. Talk to your professors, talk to your managers if it's a position. Connect with them. They will be your number one advocate. So if they're a great manager, they will push you in the right direction and make sure you grow in your career, or at least provide assistance whenever you might need it. So seek those people out. Don't shy away.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I will say that, the concept of mentorship circles is something that a mentor of mine had brought into my life a long time ago. And I certainly advocate for everyone trying to adhere to that. And when I say mentorship circles, I mean all of the things that both of them just mentioned, but I also think that you want to have people who are maybe outside of your, field completely, right? And have people who you just trust their opinion of you, and you trust, they know you very well, right? And so that could be best friends that you trust them from a professional, in a professional capacity too, to kind of help you like see things. Because I have friends who are in real estate who there's no overlap between what we do, but we've been both passionate about our careers for a long time. Both, kind of, we've watched each other kind of come up, and so to see when they see me, maybe like struggling with a decision about what I want to do, or when I decided to leave Chicago and leave the Midwest where I'd spent my whole life and move down here, there's a lot of conversations with people who are outside of medicine to just say, like, is this like fit? Am I acting like out of character? Am I doing something? Am I taking too big of a risk here? And I think it really helps to do all the things that were just mentioned, in terms of like getting rid of some of that imposter syndrome too. And then I think also another piece for the imposter syndrome is just to make sure that you stay kind of, again, true to your passions, but like have goals that you're, short-term, long-term goals. And then even what Allison mentioned, even very briefly, it's like be able to just be confident. Like you have good training, you're at an outstanding school, you're getting a great foundation for the rest of your career. Be sure of that and take that with you at every step, right? And I know it's hard, and that's the whole definition of imposter syndrome is like you don't necessarily feel like you have that confidence, but like that's part of it is just like falling back on that foundation and feeling comfortable and saying like, okay, like I do know this, and being able to speak up in that room where it's a little bit uncomfortable to speak up, or you feel like you're too junior to say something. So, but I think all of that's very valuable advice from the other panelists.
Thank you very much. There is a question in the chat. Let's talk a little about gap years. Did you take any gap year? And let me add to that, how would like the different jobs you have, right? How do they deal with that? Is that something people think it's normal, or they just frown upon, or anything really?
I took a gap year. I did, one thing I'll advise is that, whatever field you're going into, sometimes you're not planning, I know some people don't plan on taking the gap year, and then sometimes they do kind of build that into their plan. It's certainly becoming more common now, at least for medicine, and I can only speak to that. But, there are students who I mentor or I write letters for, and they're like, they know they're taking a gap year, but when I see their CV as like a junior in undergrad, I'm like, why do you, like I don't understand, you would get into like, most medical schools with this CV. But I think it's becoming more common. So certainly at least from a pre-med or medicine standpoint, it's not uncommon at all. It was definitely less common, I think, or maybe there was more stigma attached to it back when I did it, but at least from what I can tell now, because I do a lot of admissions and then residency interviews and things like that as well. So I would advise you to number one, if you're planning on it, pick some, if you're doing research or whatever it's going to be, have a diversity of experiences that you want to try. And what I mean by that is like, you might be on this road to whatever career path that you're going down, and you might have only been, for me, it was human bio. Everything was bio, like dabbled in courses here and there, but it was really focused on that. And then but I always had an interest in teaching. So when I did my gap year, I was a substitute teacher when I wasn't doing research. And I just got to like get that experience. And it was something I was always interested in, just to see what it was like. Not that I had any real career aspirations to become a teacher, and I certainly gained a lot of perspective and respect for teachers being in that position, even briefly. So I did that, and I think what I'd advise you to do is like if you're doing research, or if you're doing, kind of line that up early, make sure that you have project, because remember, like, especially if you're planning on applying to graduate school, from that gap year, you're really applying at the start of the gap year. So I think people kind of often think of it as like, oh, I'm going to have the whole year to like add to my CV and do all these things. Well, not really. You're going to have like maybe 2 or 3 months. And then, for most graduate schools, you're applying in the fall for the following year. So, just keep that in mind, that whatever you're doing in that last year before your gap year, you should try and continue that on or build off that, or if it's research, really try and get it done so you can present it, whatever the case may be. Just keep in mind that application cycle starts up a lot sooner than you think from a gap year standpoint.
Yep, thanks.
I'll say that, so I went straight through from Michigan State to my MPH. I just thought like that's what everybody does, right? They go straight from undergrad straight into grad school. I at the end of that was just like, oh, I burned out. So I finished my MPH in 3 semesters as well. I was like, no, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to get it done. Then I'll never have to go back to school ever again. I'm done. That was not what happened. But I just thought you go straight through. So that's what I did. And I had a year and a half after I graduated that I worked full time. And then I instantly was back into a PhD program. And that was not a point in time that you can take any kind of breaks per se. And I did that quickly and as fast as I possibly could. And I don't recommend that. 4 years and I was burned out completely. So I took about 6 months off after I finished my PhD, and I tried a couple of different part-time things while I waited on postdoc positions and like full-time positions as well. I was applying for a bunch of different things, but I was so burned out by the end of my PhD program. I was not applying for jobs or postdocs while I was defending my dissertation. So I was like, no, I'm going to take this time off. I need it for me. I've never had it before. And then in public health, I do a lot of interviewing for student positions and internships. It is very common to have big, changes from one thing to another in public health. It's very interdisciplinary. There's like a lot of people who change career paths later in life. There's people who take, 10 years before they go back to graduate school. So it's not always a straight path. You talk to a lot of people, at least from the public health sphere. There's a lot of people who do go straight through, but there's a lot of people who don't, and that's okay. And we look at that on applications, and we don't think of that as a negative per se. I mean, if you just didn't do anything for 10 years and you're like, oh yeah, I just like you didn't fill your time with the things that you wanted to do like professionally to help you get to where you are now, we're probably like, that doesn't maybe make sense. But like, it's not uncommon to have big gaps of time between, graduate school or even degrees or positions, internships and things like that. Like it is in public health, at least you see people who like started MPH, they worked for a few years, they maybe did something else, they came back to it. And that's pretty normal, I think, at least in the public health field. So
I agree with everything that's being said. I think people nowadays are more understanding that life happens. Maybe back then there was a stigma associated with it, especially when I graduated. But right now, as mentioned before by the other panelists, like people are switching careers into set fields. Like, oh, I was like working at a bank. Now I want to work in the tech industry. I learned like coding over the summer or over the past 2 years. And then I switched into the field, or like self-taught programmers, because what we look, at least from my career, what they look for is what you've done. So if you can showcase the skills that you have, even in a personal portfolio, doing something else completely different, they care more of like, hey, you said you can do XYZ, you've shown us you can do XYZ, maybe you'll get an interview, maybe you'll get a position based off of that. So I agree with what the other two panelists said as well. There should be, at least in the tech industry, there should be no stigma associated with taking a gap year at all.
Great, thanks. So, okay, another question. When you were an undergrad at MSU, did you actually use or access any career-related campus resources? Or do you have any experiences?
I did. I think I went to get my resume checked a couple times. Because I didn't know what I was doing, essentially. I didn't even know what I wanted to do as well. So I had like snippets, like I did a lot of things. I had snippets of everything, but like bringing it all together into some cohesive piece of one pager was a little hard. So I went to the career services, got my resume checked, maybe attended a few seminars there, especially towards when I was graduating. I don't know if your academic advisor counts as a service, but they helped me a lot. I probably would not have my undergraduate degree if it wasn't for my academic advisor. They helped me, guide me, and point out all these resources as well along the way. So at least that's my experience with that.
yeah, I think the only service I used, if you can call it that, was my academic advisor, who was like my lifeline through everything. Just wonderful advice and supportive. And I never I was pre-med. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to med school, and like I wasn't always sure about that. And, you know, my parents were like, oh, no, you go to med school, go to med school, go to med school. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want that. So I always felt like I had support and somebody outside of that situation as well, of just being like, what do you want? What are you interested in? Let's try to find classes to get you to that point so you can help make that decision for yourself. So that was like my lifeline, was to use my academic advisor for advice on potential coursework or, you know, courses, electives, anything like that, to help me kind of better make a decision. So
Thank you. John?
I got nothing, and maybe this is just me being like the oldest person in amongst the panelists. Maybe I'm just not remembering. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what resources there. I'm sure I did. I mean, I definitely used my advisor as well, but I can't think of like pre-health related like resources or groups that I was a part of, if I was. So
Okay. Thank you. So let's go to a more general question. What advice would you give to any underrepresented students who are interested in studying and working in STEM?
I think, you know, again, not to be repetitive, but I do think truly, like, you know, you have to kind of love it. And I think, you know, even Allison just touched on this with, you know, if you're doing it for other reasons than your own passion, right? If somebody's telling you to because you think pre-med is what you should be doing, or you think, you know, pre-vet or whatever it is, like if you think it's for anybody else than yourself, you know, that's going to lead to burnout. That's going to lead to maybe early career, you know, changes in terms of like what you end up doing later. So I think it's really like that's why it's really important right now in the stage that you're in, is, you know, kind of get out there and see what the long-term careers look like, you know, get that shadowing experience so that you see what the end goal is. Because, you know, I remember even within medicine thinking I was going to be a surgeon. I just thought like early on, before I had exposure to anything, I thought I would be a surgeon. And you know, once I actually kind of did some shadowing, and I remember shadowing a plastic surgeon that was like right in Okemos, right off of campus. He was great. He was very welcoming and everything, but like very quickly for me, I was like, nope, this is not for me. And so I you know, it helped me to narrow my career interest down a little bit, even within medicine. I'm sure it applies to even within other specialties or other fields too.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to? Okay. Maybe enough of the advice. Let's go to something more personal, perhaps. Like, let's say, what academic or professional work accomplishments are you most proud of?
I think the first publication that you have as a first author is the big one. You're just like, oh man, that's my name. Like, and that's like just such a proud moment, I think. At least it was for me. And I, you know, it was like tears and sweat going into this, of, you know, years of work of getting something, you know, to all the way to publication. It doesn't seem sometimes like it would take as long as it does, but in API, especially in you know, publicly available data, and sometimes limitations with the kinds of data that we have, it's hard to get some of the stuff that we need for the analyses. So just, you know, pushing through and making sure that you know, finish a project. There's been projects that we've had to abandon because, you know, either you know, data use agreements went out of use, or, you know, they've suddenly said, oh, we're not going to let you use that anymore, or like there's new data and you can't get access to it, or somebody else has now published something very similar. So that first author paper, I think, is probably that first author paper is probably the proudest accomplishment. And I think now I switched over to more like of an assessment kind of work. And the first big thing that I did in this job that I currently have is work on the particulate matter supplement ISA, which we had to review a bunch of literature and just say, you know, is particulate matter hazardous to human health, particularly cardiovascular disease and to total mortality. And we redid that assessment. And then I think when the policy assessment was done with that, they're like, if we use what they've done and say, you know, we can save 12 million lives. And that was pretty cool because you really don't really get that just from an individual like research paper, which I mean, still is a massive accomplishment and still happy about that. But like to see that, you know, you've helped to set the science that created a regulatory standard that dropped, you know, to be more protective of public health. I felt like that was like a big accomplishment that like, hey, I worked on that. I mean, very minorly probably in the grand scheme of things, but it was like, that's really cool. Like that's a national like standard that's been put into place because of something that I helped be a part of. And I thought that was really cool too. So.
Thank you.
I can agree with seeing your name on something, like seeing your name on the credits of a video game. Nobody goes through the credits, but I go like, if your name's on there, you go there and take a screenshot, right? Be like, and then post it all over social media. Be like, hey, look. If you actually go through the credits, you'll see my name on that video game. So that's always a good feeling. And then on the flip side, I guess one of what I feel like was the biggest accomplishment for me based off of who I am as a person. I don't like to give up. I don't like to quit. If I start something, I'm going to finish it. It was my last semester of my PhD program when I decided I needed to let go. For me, it took a lot. I didn't want to give it up. I was like, I started this. I'm doing so well. Like I'm almost so close to the end. Like maybe like 2-3 more years left of this. But I had to, like, life was happening. It's a newborn baby. Like I just started my career in this. So I am proud of that because for me, it indicates like I'm starting to know myself. I'm starting to know my limits. I'm starting to know where to push and where to not push. And then I'm actually like, I guess I'm just proud that I realized that like, it's my first time ever giving up on something. Like I complete things. Like I'm a completionist. I cannot do things that are incomplete. So at least for me, that was a big step in my life. And hopefully one day we'll come back to it. But for now, at least I am at peace with everything. So I'm proud of that at least.
John?
Yeah, I think trying to keep it's hard to pick. Certainly the first paper is really big too. But I would say for me, I have like a personal one and then more of like a professional accomplishment. But personally, I would say similarly, there was a point in residency where I decided I wasn't sure if I wanted to do academics or not. I knew it made sense for me, and I had done a lot of research prior to that point in residency, and had kind of, you know, a CV that looked like someone that was going into academics at that point. But I think I was feeling a little bit of burnout from residency, and had just my wife had 2 more years of fellowship or residency and then fellowship in Chicago, and so I knew I had 2 years. And I was like, let me just work at one of our community sites, make, you know, much more money than I would make in academics for a couple of years, pay off some of these loans, like, and you know, I was kind of straying away from what I think my passions were. And I remember one of my attendings, one of the supervising physicians that was, you know, responsible for training me, who I actually didn't have a great relationship with. We like kind of butted heads a lot. He knew I had interviewed for a job at his community site, and he said, you know, why do you want to work here? And I was like, gosh, why are you the way that you are? You know, like I was so like, you know, me and him just didn't get along. And so I assumed it was his way of saying, I don't really want you to like work with me, you know, at this site. But what he was saying was like, no, he's like, I just know you're passionate about public health, and you're passionate about, you know, social determinants of health and research. And, you know, you've done a lot of things. And he was like, let me ask you this. Did anybody comment on or ask you questions about your CV or your papers or anything during your interview here? And I was like, no, actually, like now that you mention it. And it was, you know, because, you know, you need community physicians. That's the majority of the physicians that are, you know, in our country. And my mother is a community physician, but it certainly was not what I had put all of this effort into up until that point. And so I was straying away from my passion. And he, you know, as weird as it was, we did not have a relationship like this. He was not a mentor of mine at all. He was the one to kind of call me out on it and say, like, you know, no one's going to care about any of that stuff here. And you're certainly not going to get time to do any of it if you work here. Like, no one's going to give you buy down from your clinical requirements to go do any of that work. And so then, along with that feeling of like getting that first job at University of Chicago when I was, not fellowship trained, because I had put that work in prior to that, that was a really awesome feeling. And then probably professionally, the accomplishment I'm most proud of is right now we have a student volunteer initiative that we're running out of our waiting room that's been up for more than 2 years now. I started it during the height of COVID with like one undergrad student from Duke who just like believed in me and like followed me in this like crazy idea to do this in the middle of the pandemic. But we basically screen patients in the waiting room while they're waiting for their ER bed or their ED bed to open up. We screen them for social needs, and then we provide resources. We connect them with there's an online platform in North Carolina called NC Care 360, creates referrals for community-based organizations so they get plugged in and get help with housing, transportation, whatever their unmet need is, because we know that those non-medical needs very much now it's becoming more recognized that those are directly related to health outcomes. And so that's been up and running for 2 years. We have about 1,000 patients that we've screened and gotten enrolled or given resources to. And, it's one of those things that doesn't really show up anywhere else, and it's all volunteer based, but the students really love it because they get to practice a lot of pre-professional competencies that you need to go into like health fields, like interviewing, a patient who's got a lot of unmet social needs is a very sensitive topic. And so they have to learn how to like talk to people about things like that. And so that's been really rewarding to be a part of that and see patient benefit, student benefit, and it's kind of a win-win. So
Thank you. So we touched on challenges before, but let's go back. There is a question: over the course of your academic or professional experience, what insights and wisdom have you gained about approaching and tackling academic and/or professional challenges, like learning difficult concepts or executing complex procedures? How do you tackle challenges?
it's a great question. I think, that could be its own panel session on its own, but I do think, there's a fine line, at least for me. I can really only speak of my experience, but for me, early on in my career, I think I would allow ego to maybe get in the way of kind of finding better conflict resolution early, and whatever that conflict might be. But I would be a little bit too quick to either come to whatever conclusion I was gonna come to, like, instead of just taking some time to maybe let it simmer for a day, or kind of like not acting impulsively. So I think, and that can apply to anything in life, right? It's not just in the fields that we're talking about, but I think that has been one thing for me to just, and maybe that is what comes with having been doing this now for a decade, that you start to recognize that, like, you don't need to necessarily do what you did when you were younger and think about things in that way. And so I think that was the one thing for me, recognizing, like, I can take my time. Ultimately you want everyone to succeed. You want everyone to do well. Even people that you don't necessarily like, you don't necessarily wish ill will on them. And so when conflicts like that come up, I feel like it's easy to kind of get into your feels and your emotions and start, responding and writing that email and clicking send, when it's like, well, let me just like not, I don't put the address. I don't put the email address in. I write the email, but I don't put the email address in. And then I like look at the email, and then I might have my wife look at the email, and then I might give it 24 hours, and then I look at it again, and then I'll put the person's email address in and say, like, okay, now I'm going to send it because I've had time to cool off, and like, and so things like that. You find whatever your triggers are that kind of gets you upset, and then some of it is like, just kind of, whether it's therapy or other things, whatever people use, like, to help them to understand what the buttons are that easily get pushed. It's super helpful to have insight. So I think, getting help like that too is, I wish therapy was cheaper, because I would say everybody needs it, but it's really a nice way for you to invest in yourself. And so I think there's a whole nother discussion around that, but I think that it's a way that you invest in yourself and your future and your own mental health. And you can do it prophylactically, meaning like you don't necessarily have to have a crisis going on to go see someone and talk about kind of, what's going on in your life and things like that.
I'll go off of what John said. I also now write emails to myself, the response I'd like to send when I'm super mad about something or super emotional or invested in something where I'm just like, that would probably get me fired if I actually send it to the person it's supposed to go to. So one of the I think challenges is to like, you want to be professional, but you also want to like really stick it to somebody sometimes. And you're just like, man, you really drove me crazy today. But having just the forethought to be like, okay, this is probably not going to end well if I act this emotionally about this. So I now send that email to myself, or I have a really good friend I do it with all the time. She calls it my crazy ranting emails, and she's like, I love them when they come through, because sometimes I don't give her any warning, and I just send an email because I just want to send it to somebody to be like, this is how I felt about this. And then, you know, once you've had that time to cool off and think about, okay, this is like a better approach to have it. So I think having that, you know, a little bit of gaining professionalism and maturity over not knee-jerk reactions, and has been one of the better skills to learn. Very quickly you learn that, oh, I probably shouldn't have sent that, and sometimes you can't bring those emails back. So have a friend or yourself send those emails, have somebody read them, make sure, you know, you've had the time to think about that and think it through. So I will agree on that. I think the other thing is I've been really learning about like environmental mixtures and statistical methods for that. It's kind of an emerging aspect of my field. And we contacted one of the creators of the statistical package, and boy, he was a jerk. But we still contacted him. We had a lot of conversations with him, and then we talked to other people, and we actually contacted other people who were doing these methods and thinking things through. Be like, this seems like this has this kind of bias in it. Like, can we reduce that in another way? Can we think about how this exposure is now being amplified in this way? Like, and we were just asking questions, and he just got super defensive. Like, no, my method is wonderful. But we still talked to him, and we had really thoughtful conversations of trying to get at like some of the underlying structures and the statistical models. And then we've talked to other people who are both very strongly happy to use that method, and then other people are like, no, I won't use that method. So just contact people if you're interested in learning a difficult concept. And you know, sometimes you will talk to jerks, and that happens in every aspect in life, whether it's academically, professionally. But it's also a good learning experience too, of trying to figure out you know, just how things work. You don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to go to the person who maybe created that to ask them those questions as well. It's really intimidating. It goes back to that imposter syndrome that you probably shouldn't question somebody. But don't be afraid to ask questions. That's, I think, just generally something that I've learned too, that it's okay to do that. And it doesn't mean that you're, you know, you're dumb or you're slow or whatever, you know, like that getting over that hump of like, no, I do know this, but you know, this is everything that we do. There's always going to be something you don't know in your field. And this is the whole point of kind of like for research stuff, is it's to always learn. There's always new methods, new data, new ways to think about things. So being able to critically think about that, and then to reach out to people who are doing that work that you're interested in, and to learn from them. So
Thank you.
I agree with everything that's being said. My personal mantra is a rising tide lifts all boats. So I like, especially early on when I was transitioning from academics to a career, you're so used to be like an exam, it's you in that room by yourself, no help, nothing, you got it. Like what you know is what you know and stuff. So I approached working like that a little bit early on in my career, where I would try and tackle a problem on my own and not reach out, be like, hey, I need to learn this, like try and like, I don't know, Khan Academy, a whole entire like routine all by myself in 24 hours, sometimes even working overtime. Then I was like, this is someone probably knows how to do this better than I do, or has already done this, right? There's no need to be reinventing the wheel. So making sure, like, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. So making sure like I'm aware that I'm part of a team. There's some things I will know that some other people don't know. There's some things that other people will know that I don't know. So it's better to operate as if you're an integral part of the team, making sure you're lifting up your coworkers up when they can be elevated, so that hopefully when the coin flips, they'll lift you up when you are the subject matter expertise as well. So making sure like, hey, I'm not on an island. I work as part of a team. Let me do my best to work as a team. And then one of my other how I've overcome challenges, I'm more on the quieter side. In terms of, yeah, I'm just more on the quieter side in general. So when I'm approached with like social issues, for example, at work, like microaggressions and all that jazz, that internal what needs to be an external what. So I need to like speak up. Like I can't like some things you like, as much as it's unprofessional for them to say it, so you need to also not be unprofessional in your reaction, but you need to react to it professionally as well, not just internalize it, be like, oh wait, what, like that was really off color, and then leave it in my head. I need to like speak up, because this is a career I'm in. I also like, it needs to be a safe space for everybody. So if I don't speak up, who will speak up? If we all don't speak up, then who's going to speak up out against it? So at least how I'm trying to overcome those challenges, just converting that internal what into an external why was that said? Like, was that necessary? So at least that's what I'm trying to do more.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that also, because I feel like all of you are going to go on and become leaders at some point in your career, whether it's earlier or not, but you'll become leaders and experts in your field. And if you're the person who has an opportunity from like a microaggression standpoint or anything in conflict, if you're the person who steps up in the moments where like you're going to have that hesitation, like, should I say something, should I not say something, you are then not just being a leader, but you're also allowing other people who might be feeling the same way as you just to like say, okay, good, I'm glad someone said something, because I felt the same way. And so I think that there's a lot there from a conflict standpoint. And I also wanted to add, because I know we kind of, all three of us kind of, we're talking more about conflict, but from like just a career guidance standpoint, I think one thing I recognized more so when I had a family, but certainly, early on in my career too, I recognized that you can't be everything to everyone all the time. And you have to decide what are the things that are going to go from a response, like that you're going to have to, get rid of from a responsibility standpoint if you're going to take on something new, because your bandwidth is only so much, especially if you're carving out time for yourself and carving out time for your relationships, whether or not you have a family, whether it's your social relationships or your immediate family or whatever the case may be. Something will sacrifice if you bring on too much, right? And so it's time management. It's like knowing kind of what are the things that you need to really prioritize, knowing if you're a morning person or an evening person, and scheduling yourself like around those sorts of things so that when you're going to be at your best in terms of getting like deep work. There's a book by Cal Newport that I love called Deep Work, where you can carve out a couple hours and really focus and get something done, right? Versus like, oh, I'll spread, I'll get a little bit done here and there throughout the day. Well, it's like, well, life happens and other responsibilities come up. And so to be highly efficient, you want to, number one, keep the priorities of whatever you're taking on task-wise or challenges that you're taking on in your career. You want to really be highly focused on a certain number of those, but not spread yourself out too thin. And so I think that's another thing that I figured out, like, whenever I say yes to something, and my wife constantly reminded me this, like, whenever you say yes to something, you're gonna have to say no to something else. So meaning like something that you're already currently doing is probably gonna like have to go, right? Or be put on the back burner, whether you like it or not. And so I think that's something that, the sooner you recognize that, and all of you are probably doing that without knowing it, in undergrad where you have to balance, tests and different classes, but it just becomes more and more and more as you get, further along in your career. And so right now you're practicing for what you'll be doing kind of for the rest of your career.
Thank you. So let's talk a little about, since we learn a little more about your careers, let's talk about what are topics or opportunities in your field that most excite or interest you? What's the most exciting thing happening right now?
I can start because mine actually falls very much into the DEI realm, but there's a push right now in research for the concept of intersectionality to be implemented more into how we design our research studies and the questions we ask. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a concept that was born out of the business world. I think her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's her name. She was the one that came up with the idea, or really put a title to it. And it was from the business world, where if you looked at opportunities for advancement or for promotion for women, well, very clearly the evidence was showing that like that wasn't equal in from women compared to men. Similarly, opportunities for advancement or promotion for people who are Black or of any other minority were not as much as for their white counterparts. And so she raised the point of like, well, none of us live lives that are single issue, right? We're all complicated. We all have multiple aspects to us. So some of us are, you're talking about gender, race, ethnicity, any of these things where you live. And so, the idea that like a Black woman therefore would have significantly less opportunities than somebody like a white male, right? And so the idea that you have to look at things from multiple lenses, and some of these concepts might be compounding on top of each other. And so I think the fact that this is now starting to become more talked about, because as someone whose work focuses on unmet social needs and just the social issues that like our patients face day to day, and how that affects their health and their health outcomes, it's something we all kind of realize very quickly. It's like, if you start looking at the numbers, there are groups of people, we oftentimes just kind of break people down as if there's like these are all single issue topics, but they're not. They're very complicated and they're multifactorial. And so it's even though it's depressing to look at the research and look at the numbers when we're talking about these things, and it goes from anything across medicine, where you see that people of color have worse outcomes for any number of different reasons, or get treated worse for any number of different reasons. It's the exciting part to me is that there is now a push to start analyzing these things in a much more like comprehensive way, where we're actually maybe going to get more insight into some of the issues. So
I'll go off of what John was saying as well, is that so I do a lot of reproductive epidemiology work, and there's been a big shift in the literature and in the field for the language of saying, gestational parent, birthing parent, pregnant person, rather than just maternal, just woman. And that's been really exciting to kind of see that we're kind of moving past some of the more, outdated terminology. And I think one of the other things that has been really exciting in public health in general is the concept of race is not a biological reason why you have to include that in research analyses, that it's a social construct and it's a proxy for a lot of different things of, access to care, education, disadvantage, and like where you live. And there's environmental justice issues that I've worked with as well, that, we have to consider like that race wasn't just because of it's not a biological difference that we're talking about. And some of these epidemiological analyses, it's literally that people of color have been put into potentially neighborhoods that are more exposed to harmful chemicals, harmful exposures, closer to roadways, all these like other factors that are influencing their health that were not necessarily thought about outside of a biological construct. And it's really exciting to see that we're kind of shifting some of that literature, and the idea that, I don't know, even like maybe 15 years ago, you were like, everybody's like, you must have race ethnicity included into your epidemiology analysis. And now it's like, are you including that because you're worried about like social construct issues? Is there really a biological plausible reason why you would include that for this outcome? Or it like just thinking about it as a whole, like cumulative impacts of exposure, of health, of how every part's like chemical and non-chemical are coming together to create and impact health. So I think that's been a big shift in public health, and it's really exciting to see that we're not just thinking about things in biological or things that we might not understand, but we're actually considering social aspects as well, and considering the whole environment into kind of looking at health. So.
I guess I could add something from my field. What I'm most excited about is like the improving landscape of accessibility in games, essentially. Back then you had I feel like you had a video game, whether it's Mario or whatever, it was hard. No other options. So you either have the abilities to be twitchy and like fast speed moving, and then to actually play the game. But now we're the landscape shifting towards more making video games accessible to everybody. So even if you have an invisible disability, they're starting to put those options into games as well. For example, if you have a fear of spiders or arachnophobia, there's some video games out there that allow you to eliminate all, like if you're playing more like a darker horror video game, there are video games out there that allow you to like not show the spiders or show them as something else, so that you as a player can also play the game without like being hindered by a fear or like a disability that you might have. I like also that like even as they're expanding access to all, like even all ages games, like right now one thing I enjoy the most like some evenings is playing Mario Wonder with my 3-year-old. He doesn't know what's happening, he just sprints across the screen and we're telling him to wait, we need to collect the Wonder Seeds and all that jazz. But the fact that there's a character Yoshi in the game that takes very little damage and is very any age, any ability friendly, that's like a movement towards the positive. It doesn't have to be a 3-year-old playing it, but like anybody can play, join the party. So at least I'm excited about that. Like you don't have to have a disability to use these settings, but these settings make playing video games a more comfortable experience for everybody essentially. So I'm excited to see what else we keep including in those settings. So
you are all working on really exciting projects, so that's really exciting for us to hear. So if you could go back and talk to the person you were as an entering first year undergrad, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to do things for yourself. And it's okay to make decisions that, for me, like, and taking that into consideration rather than thinking about everyone around me. I think we kind of touched upon this, of like, parental pressure maybe to go into one field or another. But just to not have the answer, because you have to declare a major and then you have to like figure out, oh, is this what I'm gonna do? Like, I would have never thought when I started day one of undergrad that I wouldn't have gone to med school. So being able to like come out of that and making that decision, like, no, that's not the right choice for me, but I do like this path and I think this is the path forward. And that, when I started in public health, I was in environmental health and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do like I thought I was going to actually do infectious disease tracking, and then I got into environmental health and I loved it. So even then, you can shift gears, and that's okay. You can make differences. You can change your mind, not having the answers all the time. One of my mentors constantly asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up? Is this what you want to do?" And if you're not on that path, get on that path to do that. And 5 years from now, what do you want to be doing? If that's what you're doing now has nothing to do with that, start making that change so you can get on that path and reach that goal. But she constantly asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Are you happy doing this? Like, so that's just something I always keep in my mind now. Like when I say yes to new projects, is this actually what I want to be doing? Is this interesting to me? Is that going to fulfill my goal of what I want to do next? So having that in the back of your head and just being okay with change, I guess, and not having that answer. And that's okay too. Being able to say, I don't have the answer right now. I think that's always a big struggle, that you want to have a plan, but taking the steps that you need to try to figure that out and being able to, ask yourself, I want to do this when in 5 years, I want to be this. So, and taking those steps. So, yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I could add on to what Allison said. If I could go back to undergrad, one thing I'd tell myself is to take better care of myself. It's your first time away from home, big changes all around. You might think you're invincible. You might have been sheltered from other aspects of life that you're not aware. Like maybe everything was great in high school or whatever, and then you go to college, you're all alone. At least for me, like October, gray clouds until April for the most part. Well, it felt like that when I was at Michigan State. So like, that seasonal, at least for me, seasonal depression shows up. I didn't know what it was, right? I'm in a new place. I don't know what it was. So I'm thinking I'm invincible and everything. So take the time to be yourself, take the time to do things outside of school. Make sure you take yourself, get care of yourself, because those things, everything else you're ignoring about yourself will come and haunt you in a weird way, or like will stop your progress into your desired career path when you least expect it. So take a breather. Everything's gonna be all right. And like, it's okay to not know all the answers. It's okay to not know what you want to do. That's what undergrad is, right? Figure it out. If you have the ability to take the time you need, take the time you need to figure it out. At least it will prevent like future switches. And again, it's never too late in the future to switch to something else as well. So at least that's what I would tell myself. Take care of yourself.
Great advice. John?
Yeah, the first thing I'd probably tell myself would be go ahead and just break up with her. It's not going to work out, man. It's just going to save you some time. And then after that, I'd probably say, you're surround yourself with people that bring out the best in you, the best version of yourself. And I think that was something it took me a little too long to realize that, and for a couple of reasons, but I think that you want to surround yourself with people that like uplift you, right? So if you have negativity in your life that's coming from people that you're hanging out with, that like that's a choice that you're making, and you want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that are pushing you to be a better student, pushing you to be like a better person, or bringing out kind of those qualities in you that might already be there, and certainly not someone that may be like bringing you down in whatever way, because that can really have an impact in your experience in undergrad, like in every aspect, in your classes and everything else. So I think that would be the biggest thing that I would probably say, but also having, I definitely agree with everything that's already been said as well. That it's okay to kind of be uncertain or unsure, and just give yourself some grace too. And I think there's also, going back to the same drum I've been beating this whole time, is like, there's this idea of just being like CV obsessed, or having like making sure that you have all of these different things on your CV, and I have to have a million different experiences or extracurricular things that I'm doing. I'll tell you, I mean, I probably, between faculty, residency, and med school applications, I probably read, I don't know, 500 of them a year. I mean, it seems like roughly 400 to 500 of them. And I'll tell you that the people who stand out are the ones that have a passion and have something that they've given themselves opportunities to create something, maybe, or to be in something long term and have a longitudinal relationship with a organization or a group where they were sought through and built it into something bigger. But going and doing a one-off event, like every opportunity you get, right? And if that's taking away from kind of the core goals, or the short and long-term goals that you have, whether it's studying or otherwise, I would say just worry less about filling the CV, and just kind of focus in on the things that really are who you are, the things that make you happy, the things that and obviously you have to have a diversity of experiences in some regard. I'm not saying not to do anything else, but I am saying that make sure that they're meaningful, and that a commitment to something long term certainly means more than 10 different things where you went and did it for one day and that's it. And it becomes very clear to the person that's reviewing your application or interviewing you that a lot of that might have been fluff, or just something that you put down because you went and did it for an afternoon. Very rarely are those one-off experiences going to come up again, right? But what will come up is, oh, you were part of that team or that organization for 3 years, and you had all of these events. Tell me about that. And like, well, how was that meaningful to you? Or or you created something, right? Or that's, I think those are things that stick out a little bit more, and maybe will bring out more of who you are as an individual too.
Thank you. So we're getting close to the end. Let's close with a positive note here. So what's the most fulfilling aspect of your career field? What makes you happy with what you're doing? That's our last question here.
I think I'm lucky that I get to meet a lot of different people every day. I get to talk to people from who have completely different experiences throughout, like 20 to 30 every single time I go into work. So I get to be have these like single serving experiences with them, where I get to have an impact on their life because I get to take care of them and treat them as patients, but I also get to kind of learn from them too, and that's really cool to me. And on top of that, I get to teach, you know, residents and students along the way. And I think that, you know, that's not necessarily for everybody, but that's really like, you know, there's never been a point during COVID or anything that I thought about changing careers or anything, even though the emergency department was the last place, you know, people wanted to be during that time. And so that's kind of, that was my real like test without me really knowing it, that I chose the right field, and that I you know, I kind of did my due diligence before getting into it. So yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think it's for me it's meeting a bunch of different people, learning different expertise, learning, you know, there's so many careers out there that I had no idea existed. There's so many paths that people like have specifically studied, and I'm like, I didn't know that existed. And I think being in a big federal agency like I am, and you know, we have a lot of coworkers from different federal agencies like close to us as well, and like building like collaboration, like it's just really interdisciplinary. There's just so much things that are going on, and learning from other people and being like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's how it applies to me. And there's just so much like emerging in environmental epidemiology, in like what we do, and feeling like you're helping in a little bit, you know, that's I think really exciting, and that is really fulfilling. But then just being able to like build on my experience and being able to learn from other people. I think that, you know, what I do is not something that I'm ever going to 100% know everything, and knowing that that's okay. But then also being able to surround myself with these really interesting people, and like learning their jobs that I have no idea impacts what I do downstream from what they do. I just think it's really exciting. It's you know, you're going to meet some jerks in your time. That just is life. But you meet some really interesting people. You get really interesting experiences from them. And just being able to see how we can put all of that together, and to really work together in like a massive group project essentially, and produce this really profound scientific document that's really helpful in setting policy and regulation. So just, you know, just being able to be interdisciplinary, I think is really exciting as well. So
Thank you.
Yes, one thing that excites me about what I'm doing is just seeing the impact that games have on people in general. People use video games for different reasons, right? Some just for pure entertainment, some to escape life, some to connect with people. So it's always exciting when you find those meaningful reviews. You just ignore the negative reviews. We don't talk about those, but or at least we analyze those, see where we can do better. But like at least when you really like someone really connects with what you're making, and you're like, hey, I actually helped. I was on the game team that worked on that, so that's always a good feeling. I play video games as well, so it's always nice to. It's fulfilling that I found that intersection between a passion and a career as well. So I get to play video games while I work, and I also play video games after work. But for the most part, I get to play video games while I work. So that in itself, like, I don't know, it's a great feeling to be able to find an intersection of like some external passion in your career, and just have that go through and never get bored with that. So at least that's what's most exciting to me about the industry, having an impact on people's lives and finding something that connects a career and a passion for me.
Thank you so much. We would really like to thank all our panelists for sharing their time with us this evening. I think we all learned a lot, definitely, about different careers as well. I would also like to thank everybody for attending this Amplify STEM event, and please pay attention to the emails you get from this group about future events for next semester at this point. And thank you all for being here with us, and especially our partners. Have a great night. Yeah, if you can stop recording, Nick.